session by Senthamil. He's going to talk about Power Automate integration with SPFX. He's going to give the demo as well as the detail about the integration part. Senthamil, welcome to the bootcamp. Please take over.
Okay, thank you, Jenkin. Hello, guys. Good morning and good afternoon here in Singapore time. Today, I'm going to discuss more about the Power Automate, and I would give you more details about how to integrate the Power Automate with SPFX. Assumption is that you guys have already known about the Power Automate and have some basic knowledge on the Power Automate plus the SPFX development. I will not go through the basics of the SPFX because my assumption is that the audience who are here knows more than me on the SPFX. I'm just one of the developer who's doing SPFX with SharePoint. Okay, so this is the small agenda which I have for today. First one, I would just mention about myself, my detail. In case if you have any other questions, you can reach to me always. The second thing about some basic SPFX development, especially on how do I integrate with the Power Automate. It's a simple step. And third one, the Power Automate. Again, it is kind of how I created the Power Automate to make it to integrate with the SPFX. The last one, there are so many, when I first introduced this kind of session to other UG or any other places, so many people were asking questions on why you should do this. Are you insane? Normal SPFX development is faster. Why do you want to integrate Power Automate? So I would cover certain scenarios of the Power Automate integration with SPFX. It might work out or might not work out in your own scenarios. It's all purely on the solution driven assumption. So if it fits in your organization and in your need, then you can go with it, or else you can always drop off this option. To be first about myself, I'm MEP on the office development. I do more M365 development. Recently doing more Power Automate, Power Apps, and Power BI as well. So SharePoint nowadays doesn't work alone. SharePoint works best very well with Power Platform nowadays. That's how the Microsoft also promote. SPFX, my experience over SPFX development in recent days, it's slightly coming down because enterprise already thinking that customizing the SharePoint is becoming more troublesome. So they switch to the Power Platform. So kind of Power Automate plus the Power Platform. And I have my own blog, mssgreat.net. And you can always reach me on the Twitter. I'll be active on the Twitter, and any questions you can DM me on the Twitter. And I have my YouTube channel as well. Later I'll show you. There is a separate playlist for the SharePoint framework. If you can see here in my screen, I speak more about SPFX. You can see all my videos here. I speak about the Teams integration, Bootstrap with Phantasm, ENP.js. So I have several SPFX on my playlist. You can go through that. My channel is, go back to the screen. My channel is MSS Great. That's right. Okay. So regarding the SPFX, most of the people who are in attendees or here in the crowd might be much familiar with SPFX. They might use several of their framework. My favorite framework is no framework, which means that I always use the plain JavaScript or the TypeScript. Most of the time, I just go with the TypeScript because it avoids the hassle of installing React.js or Angular, and they keep upgrading it. Then keeping up with them becomes troublesome in some time. But I do respect the React.js and Angular and whatever the JavaScript framework, because when your web part grows more and more bigger, then that becomes much necessary. Whatever the TypeScript which I speak about, It's for a very simple web part. You create it in your organization and just deploy into your SharePoint. It works out very well. Once you start creating a very big kind of SPFX development, not just the web part, maybe your add-in plus the whole customization of SharePoint, obviously your framework becomes eminent. You cannot get away with the framework. At that time, I would prefer more of React.js. Why React.js? Because Microsoft is more putting more effort in creating the React controls, Office UI. So their focus is more towards the React. So obviously, if you go along the path of Microsoft, then it's easy for you to upgrade or keep in latest with the controls. Angular is also a kind of popular framework which you can go with, but it's up to purely with your choice and your organization plus the skills. And there is so many of the factors which affects your SPFX development. Nevertheless, whatever the framework which you are using, you have a choice to execute your HTTPS request or the REST API request through any of the framework, also through the plain TypeScript. So that's how the SPFX development with the TypeScript comes in handy. No dependencies. So Power Automate has a feature where you create a Power Automate, then you can make it to trigger based on the HTTPS request or HTTP request. That in turn might return whatever the value which you are looking for. So I'm going to make use of that concept and use the SPFX as a web part and integrate the Power Automate at the backend. The HTTP trigger, which comes with the Power Automate, it gives you an endpoint. So that is an endpoint which I would trigger in the SPFX, the REST API call, and that would execute your Power Automate. It goes through several processes and it returns you the JSON. In this case, it returns the JSON. It's up to you. REST call is the JSON format, which is the standard format which most people uses it. That becomes much easier when you consume back in the SPFX. So JSON format is much more preferred. It is not that you have to be with JSON. You can even just return the plain HTML format. That becomes more bulky. But for a simple use cases like you are returning status from the Power Automate, a simple status where you want to just show directly into your web page, at that time you can just even return your HTML. That would become much more handy. So it's up to you. How do you, what is the output value you are returning it to back to the SPFX? And finally, as I mentioned most of the time I use a simple TypeScript. TypeScript is more mature nowadays. Most of the call you can do the TypeScript. It depends on more of whether it is a performance option or it's a best practices option, as I mentioned you before. Performance wise, it's the same as you use the React.js. That's not much of a package you are going to install. From the standard or the best practices perspective, you can argue. There are several best practices you can even follow just with the plain TypeScript, which makes your code more readable and more maintainable. So it's up to you how you decide whether you want to use a simple TypeScript or React.js or Angular, as I mentioned. Okay, so in a nutshell, I would use HTTP request or the REST call to invoke Power Automate. Next, about the Power Automate, as you have mentioned, you should have some understanding about what is Power Automate and what is that for. And the HTTP request, there is a trigger. And again, you need to have a premium connection or the premium subscription for the Power Automate to make use of this HTTP. Not all the Power Automate free subscription has this HTTP. You have to upgrade it to the premium because it is considered to be one of the premium connector from Power Automate. And the format of the JSON, you can either pass in, it is a post method, and you return it to the SPFX which you're looking for. So it's a kind of a get and the post. That's it. You can make it synchronous, also asynchronous. It's up to you how you build your solution. If it is a long-running process, you are not waiting for a Power Automate to complete, you can make it asynchronous and just return some callback. For example, kind of an ID which tied to that callback, and you keep pinging in, or the Power Automate can just return whenever it is needed. So you can make it synchronous, asynchronous also. And the payload, you have to be very careful with the payload which it returns, the JSON. If you return a massive payload of like 2 MB, 3 MB is fine. 100 MB, 200 MB, if you are trying to return, you have to be very careful, because the possibility is that there might be a timeout or exceeding the load. So it depends on how the communication is between your SPFX and the Power Automate. And the return is JSON format is preferred. Other than that, you can return just a simple HTML also. It's up to you. Okay. And most of the time, when I say this option of integrating the Power Automate with the SPFX, many people would ask you like, why you are doing this? What is the need for integrating SPFX to Power Automate? Okay, so first option is that most of the time I used to run a kind of a SharePoint search within the SPFX, and organization wants something, a good looking search result, not the same which you have it in the SharePoint. There are so many options to format it. I agree. You have template option, change the template HTML, do all your own. STAP is there. Yes, there are so many options to search within the SharePoint, but what it gives you the power with eliminating your SharePoint search outside of your SPFX is that you have a control over your format of the data you're sending back to SPFX. Think of a scenario where your business case sometimes changes, like you want to have kind of an output with specific format and certain fields only. So those programming logic which you write to query the result, formatting the result, is completely outside of your SPFX. So tomorrow, if there is any change, you don't really need to go to SPFX except the UI, the programming logic. All the logic will be inside your Power Automate. So you go to Power Automate, change your JSON, return the JSON format which the SPFX is required, then you are done. You don't have to open SPFX, compile, build, deploy, all those hassles you can avoid. Second, the most of the time I use the SPFX with the Power Automate is that I completely isolate the business process automation or the business process which is running in the SharePoint completely out of SPFX. Think of a scenario in most of the times when I do SPFX for SharePoint. Most of the time in the enterprise will look for a nicer, responsive, good-looking form. The one which comes with SharePoint, either you develop through Power Apps or the native SharePoint list, will never work out at all. Power Apps has its own advantage and disadvantage. Example, Power Apps, you cannot be creating a nicer, very good-looking forms. It has its own basic form. You go through it, create it, and done. You want to have some nicer form with animation plus nicer font or some icons, then creating it within SPFX is much easier. You just create a form, have an entry, parent-child relation, complex forms. You do whatever the complex forms you want, and when you submit, you can trigger a flow, send a data to the flow or the Microsoft Power Automate. The Power Automate can kick in. It can insert an item into the list, and it can send an email to the person who was created by or modified by or whatever the rule which you have. And on top of it, it can even break the permission and assign a permission individually to that list item. All those operations, obviously, you can do with SPFX, PNP.js. You can be a best developer, you can do it. The problem is that 50 to 60% of the time, when you're developing this business process kind of workflow, the business process keeps changing. Suddenly, there will be one more new item coming into the list, or suddenly the process changes that you don't need to send an email to create it by, rather than business is asking you that there will be a people field which you are picking in, like the approver. So I want to send an email to the approver, CC to the created by, and BCC to something. And you don't want to break the permission. I want to break the permission, setting a permission only to the approver, and finally the approver has to modify this item. So some kind of a business process follows in. Programming with SPFX will become very difficult. It keeps changing, but again, you have to open the code, change. It's a changing, it's a very difficult task. Imagine you have completely isolated this process in your Power Automate. All you need to do is just invoke the Power Automate with the input value, maybe in a JSON, that's it. And after that, it can create an item, submit the flow. It can even trigger another flow, another Power Automate with your business process running in. You can parallel run multiple process. So you can do whatever the format or a programming logic you want to do. And it is completely out of your code. And the logic is fully in your control. All you have to do is just trigger. And finally, it can be even asynchronous. You don't really have to wait till break permission, sending an email, all those steps. You don't really have to wait in your SPFX. Once the item is created, you can get the ID of a list item created and just send it back to your SPFX. Then SPFX can say successfully created an item, sending a mail will be later. You will get all the details in. That's it. So you can just further go on processing the other details. So it is really powerful that all your business programming logic is completely isolated from your SPFX. So SPFX can be just a front end with nicer forms, nicer UI layout, and just with the data. So you manage only with the data and the UI, not with the programming language, programming logic. The other advantage would be that Microsoft always promote Power Automate to be kind of a business user tool, okay? Not as a developer tool, business mid-range business user, but the power user of SharePoint or the power user of business process. So in this scenario, your job as a developer in SPFX is to just wire up, create a nicer UI, and consume the data. That's it. All the business process, you just leave it to your business people. So they take care of the business process, they change it, they mess up with whatever they want. Finally, just tell them, I need just the data which you are looking for, that's it. They have to adhere only to the data format. Then you are happy to work with the business users. To be frank, I developed 2 of the web part in this scenario and gave the full handle to the business users. And 1 month after, when I go back to Power Automate and see, I was like kind of so complex to see that they have created 3 or 4 Power Automate on top of it. And their business process was like massive complex. When I first started developing the SPFX, their logic was to just serial. After they realized that it has a greater power to do any other business process flows, the business users started to do all the complex scenarios when an item is created. And they were really happy with the way it was architectured. And they play around with that same data, but the business process changes. In this scenario, it really worked out. If the input changes and they need more and more input to do the business process change, obviously there is a change in SPFX, which they also know. But you can design a solution such a way that it is a JSON. So sending out and in, you have some schema adhered to it. Okay. So in a way that I learned from my experience, eliminating your programming logic from your SPFX really works out for business users. That's the third point which I was mentioning in the programming logic. Try to make it very, very simple within your SPFX so that your SPFX is also light. You avoid multiple deployment. You avoid multiple manipulating of your code. Except that UI is super complex always, and it is very difficult to design a UI. That is your developer task. That's what the business needs, because business cannot develop a very good UI, except that they use the Power Apps and they just want the things to be done. But SPFX is still more powerful than Power Apps. At that time, you can make use of your SPFX. Format, on the last point which I mentioned you before, the format of the data structure, it depends on how you architect your data structure. If the if the whole data structure changes, then you will really have to think over changing either SPFX is better or you do everything into SPFX. It is not a mandatory. You should just use Power Apps with Power Automate with SPFX. It's up to the architectural decision. If business logic is more, move with that. If data manipulation is more and UI is keep changing, then no choice. You have to change the SPFX. Okay, so without speaking too much, let me go to demo. Okay, so first I will let you know what is the Power Automate I have created. And again, this is one of the scenarios which I covered. But other than that, I have several other scenarios which I could able to create, but you can contact me anytime where you want to have isolate the business process from your SPFX. So in this scenario, if you see here, I have one SharePoint search. This is for just for the testing. You might not encounter this scenario every time. This is not the 100% scenario or the perfect scenario in your organization to move integration of Power Automate with the SPFX, because most of the time searching the SharePoint REST API works out much faster than Power Automate. The only advantage of the Power Automate using with SharePoint search here is that I decide myself outside of this, saying that what is the format I want to return and what are the fields I want to return. Plus, whenever someone searches, do I need to send a keyword of the email to someone where I want to know who is searching what. Okay, so I want to send out a summary email or some email. Okay, so that was the primitive assumption which is about this Power Automate. As you can see, the first activity which you should do is you should use the HTTP request trigger. That is one of the trigger which you can create. Maybe I'll go through one of the flow which I can create. Create by automated. Then give a name and the HTTP. Sometime when the HTTP doesn't come here, see. I don't know why, but it doesn't come sometime. So at that scenario, what I do is I just select something and create the flow first. Okay. So delete it and then add it now. I don't know why I might miss something, but still this worked out. And again, if you see here, it is premium. As I mentioned you, any HTTP kind of request response you want to do, it's a premium control. So from the license perspective, you need to have a premium for Power Automate. So once you added in, the first time when you added, it doesn't generate any URL. It will look for incoming JSON format. It doesn't have to be perfect kind of full-fledged input format you want. It can be just a primitive JSON with just one input, or it depends how you want to just trigger. And you can even see here what is the method you want to have. Either you want to have a get, put, or post, or patch, or delete. It depends on what is the type of HTTP request you are sending in. Most of the time I would use post and sometimes get. It depends on whether you want to, how you want to trigger your flow. So once you select your method, you don't really have relative path, you can just leave it empty. And this is the JSON format, which input format, which you can pass. Let me show the format which I'm using. Okay, so if you can see the JSON schema here, I'm sending in two parameters. One parameter is the search keyword, whatever the search keyword you want to use, and then the search method. So search method is nothing but whether you want to search in that particular site or the whole organizational level, the whole of SharePoint within your organization. So just for testing. Okay, once I get the keyword, I'm internally calling the SharePoint REST API. Okay, I mentioned you, this is not the exact perfect scenario you would look for. From SPFX, you can directly call this REST API. Okay, but what I am doing is I'm using the same SharePoint REST API, but outside of your SPFX. Why? Because if you see here, These are the syntax or the keyword which you can use. Okay, so suddenly tomorrow your organization is coming up with saying that you don't need to filter this type of extension in your search. I want to be able to search everything. Don't filter the search result by this keyword. Right now, this search is filtering by docx PDF. It will return only the documents within the SharePoint. Okay. And in that scenario, what happens is that you really have to open your SPFX, change your keyword or your filtering criteria or whatever the refinement criteria, build, compile, deploy, all those stuff you should do. But having isolated or removed your logic, this is one of the programming logic, I would say, because you're manipulating the way the search result should return. So if I have it in Power Automate now, tomorrow if your business comes in and say that, Senthamil, you are returning only the title and modified property. I want this more property. Can you change it? Yes. Immediately I'll change it here. It will return. Obviously the return JSON might change, but if you are programming in such a way that for each JSON and for each of column, then it would work perfectly fine. So it all depends on how you consume the data as well. Okay. So the file extension, all this. So this is a simple isolation of your programming logic outside of your SPFX. So in this scenario, you can return anything you want. You can modify your search result. Tomorrow I can say that don't return any of the docx. I want only PDF. Done. You just change it here. Everything will be fine. There is no zero code change in SPFX. Okay. So once this is executed, you get a parse. This step, it depends on you. You don't really need the parse JSON again. Why you need a parse JSON most of the time in the Power Automate is that it gives you a typed value. It gives you a nicer typed value so that it's easy for you to navigate. Most of the time, when I use the Power Automate, I become like a more of daily user of a Power Automate. So I stopped using this. I start directly managing the JSON using the path. So I can say that body of, trigger body of, the slash question. So they have their own format. So start using that. Then you don't really need this parse JSON. But if you are new to Power Automate, I would suggest use the parse JSON. It will give you a typed value. It is like using your C# properties or your JavaScript properties. These properties are typed properties, and Power Automate further steps will know what is the value you are passing in. And second, what I'm doing is I'm declaring an object, the JSON object within your Power Automate. This is the original JSON which is written to your REST API, to SPFX. You can define it here. And this is an object. So Power Automate has one powerful feature where you declare a variable as object. Object is nothing but a JSON value. You can have array inside array. You can have there is an n possibility of sending this data structure. But once you send this data structure or changing it, make sure that on the other side of SPFX, you are consuming it properly. You can change this, but you have to be careful with this is nothing but your properties and values. So when the property changes, your code also should change. Okay, so these are the properties I'm just interested in searching the document. I'm just returning it. Okay, that's about properties. And I'm adding into an array because search result will always be an array. Again, Power Automate has a feature which is called array. Initially it is null, then pass this object. So it is an object of array. It is basically, I'm thinking Power Automate as a programming language. Okay. And finally, the email string to whom I want to send an email. And now I have for each because I want to format the search result in the way I want it. So obviously, whatever the result comes out from the SharePoint REST API, I have to format it. So I'm using this. That's what I told you. The parse JSON value is more helpful in this scenario. If you can see here, body of parse JSON, there is a syntax to it. Primary query, resulted query, and table and row. So this value you will get only when you use parse JSON because it knows how deep your JSON is. It can tell you exactly what is the value you can. So if you just go here, see here, the whole parse JSON will tell you whatever the nodes which are in, which are all the properties. So it knows everything. If you are not using the parse JSON, none of this will be displayed. So you have to form your own path, this path. You can form your own path. If you know the full JSON of the search result, you can form your own path. So most of the time, once I become much more familiar with JSON and play around with Power Automate, I started using my own path. Why? Parse JSON is one added overhead inside. So whenever a Power Automate, avoid having more and more activities in Power Automate, it becomes slower. So removing that parse JSON, it gives you 1 second or 2 seconds more power. Okay, and it's all programming language. So for each, find out the value, then add a switch case. You can have a switch case. This is nothing but a switch case. I'm finding out what is the value comes in. Say for example, if it is a title, I'm setting it my own title. Remember the object which I have, I'm setting my own title. Similarly, modified, I'm setting my own modified. So finally, this object is collected in the array. So just append to array. So there is a Power Automate proper activity which says append to array. That's it. So the whole array is now a JSON array. Just send that JSON array. That's it. Okay. So return a status of 200 and body is JSON. And as I mentioned you, there is an option to say asynchronous. And if you want to make it secure, you can do secure connection as well. Okay. So in a way that, and also before sending the result, I'm sending an email. This is just a simple scenario. I'm sending an email to the one who is creating the item, or one who is searching the item. So I'm just sending an email just to note that it has been processed, or if your business process has something. So once you save it, it generates a URL. It will give you a unique URL. Just copy that URL. That would be your key to call your REST API. Okay. So now this is a simple flow, which you can see on the Power Automate. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a SPFX and invoke that. For that, let me use this. Okay. I'm not going through the process of creating SPFX. You guys should be basic SPFX creation. This SPFX, if you see here, go to config, package.json. Okay, so if you see this SPFX which I created, it is just a plain basic SPFX. I have not added any framework to it. It is just a TypeScript, plain vanilla TypeScript. Okay, let me first open the URL. It should be the great at sharepoint.com. I would say workbench. Now it might not have anything. I have not started publishing it. Okay. So now this SPFX is a plain SPFX. It doesn't have anything. I just created it and not included anything. Plain. And the webpart name is invoke flow webpart. And this is the main entry point, the TS file, the TypeScript file. And I have not changed much of the HTML as well. If you can see, I just added extra text box, just a label and a text box. Label plus the text box and a button. So basically what this SPFX would do is that it will take a search keyword, enter any search keyword. So once I get the search keyword, what I'm doing is I'm just assigning the button ID to a variable, and I'm just adding an event listener. So if you are using a plain TypeScript, you can use the add event listener and the click event. When I click, I'm calling my JavaScript function. So this dot invoke function, and this is the syntax you should use if you're using TypeScript. If your screen is, if you cannot see the screen, maybe I'll let zoom in. Okay, this should be okay. Sometime people might not see. Okay, so invoke function is the function which I'm using, and this invoke function I'm getting the text box where the keywords are entered in. If you are using a TypeScript, if you are using a React.js or Angular, they have a very rich API. It's easier to get a value from DOM. But if you are using a plain TypeScript, you have to typecast. Any input will automatically be typecasted to, you have to typecast it to HTML input element. Document.getElement by ID is normal JavaScript function. You call this, typecast it, and once you typecast, get the value. So that is the search keyword which the people is going to enter in, then get the HTML, bind it, then call the flow. So this is the URL of the flow, which I mentioned you, the full URL of the flow. So once you start invoking the flow will start run. I mean, Microsoft Power Automate. I'm just keep mentioning about the old name. So Microsoft Power Automate will start coming. And again, I'm not using the React.js. You can use the React.js. Nothing will stop using to React.js. If you are not using React.js, the other choice is you have to use the HTTP, XML HTTP request, which is kind of AJAX. Previously, it is called the AJAX call. And you can open a connection, which is the post, send your JSON format. You have to specify what is the content type, JSON format. All these steps you can avoid if you are using React.js or Angular or any other framework. That's the main powerful feature of the JavaScript framework. This is a plain vanilla of TypeScript, so you have to code more. And once it is loaded, I'm checking the 200. That's why I'm sending the HTTP response is 200. And this is just a logging. And finally, you are just setting it to the inner HTML. Here, what I'm doing is that whatever the value JSON comes in, I'm just blindly dumping into the HTML. So you will see some raw JSON format. Okay. And finally, I'm just cleaning it up. I mean, it comes in the JSON format. So I'm just using the stringify method to get the value. So hopefully this should work. Most of the time I use the no browser so that I have a choice. Run any browser, and 99.9% I use the Edge, the new Edge. Okay, reload, I can reload. Please work. Hopefully it works. Okay, see here. It is a simple SPFX webpart. As I mentioned you, there is a text box and the search button, and it has a placeholder text. Probably I will search for blockchain. I want to have all the document within SharePoint which has a blockchain. To show I'm not cheating, let me run this. Okay, this is the one. Hopefully there will be one more triggered. Okay, decide. Okay, it has started running. So the SPFX is now triggered this flow, and you can see the flow here, and you can even see what is the result, search result coming in. Okay, you can see the search result modified all the data, and now it is running into for loop. Most of the time, the flow would take more time if you add the for each. Right now, I have for and for. So for each will run for a row and for each for a cell. For each for a row is for value, and for each cell is for finding out my keyword, like file name modified by, because I want data in my own format. So that's why it is, I'm formatting it. So if you avoid these steps of more for loop, so see here it is done. And once it is done, you can see the progress. Okay, it is like more of your debugging. So you're debugging your programming. So how cool you debug like this. Okay, it's really good, right? So that's how the power of converting your programming language, programming logic into outside of your SPFX. So now you can see to whom the mail was sent, everything. It's like you're debugging. And you can even see what is the value it has returned. So you can see here how many values it has returned and what is the value it has returned. So it is more of, you can see live how the code is running. And hopefully, see here, So this is a raw JSON which I returned it. Okay, and you can see here all the document which has blockchain keyword in it. Looks more ugly, but it gets the result done. Okay, so now let me use the other flow. Let me stop this one. So this is a plain SPFX with TypeScript. So which means that with TypeScript, you can do anything you want. Okay, nothing stops from using just a TypeScript. So I'm a fan of kind of just a TypeScript because most of my scenarios, I don't, just because of that, 60% of the scenarios, all my SPFX were medium to low end development. Okay, so at that time, I don't want to risk adding more React.js and Angular and other stuff, but it's up to you. So, okay, so let me demo one other flow. This flow is kind of serious flow, serious SPFX.
Still 4 more minutes.
Okay, I'm almost done. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So this is one of the serious flow, serious SPFX, because why I say it's serious. I have included Phantasm. I have included jQuery. I'm also a fan of a jQuery and anime.css, Bootstrap, and jQuery. So these are all like regular used one. So what I in this, let me run it. Then instead of speaking, then it will be easier. So most of the time I use the Bootstrap, Phantasm, anime.css, and jQuery. This is my ultimate combo in most of the SPFX. Why? Because it adds flavor to your SPFX. So now if I just refresh, okay, hopefully it has finished. Yeah, it has finished. Let me refresh again, just because. And every time I have to say please work, or else it doesn't. Okay, I can see. Okay, see here the animation effect. So animate that. What is showing you the animation? Okay, this is animation. So if you want to create a more good-looking SPFX, then Bootstrap. I mean, Office UI Fabric is also one of the good one. I don't deny. Bootstrap. I'm being a fan of Bootstrap for a long time, and the Phantasm. You can see I have not used Phantasm here, but Phantasm plus your jQuery will also make your job done. And organizational wide, the same search I'll do blockchain. Okay. Here you have a nice format of the icon. Hopefully it is triggered again. Oh yeah, it is triggered again. And if you notice that once you trigger a flow and then get the result, it is like it takes 1 minute, 46 seconds, sometime 1 minute, sometime. So there is a overhead of kind of calling the flow and then get the result done. Okay, so you will lose that, but you have an advantage of eliminating your programming outside of your SPFX. So there is a pros and cons. If you definitely need a result in 3 seconds, 4 seconds, then what you can do is you can, once you get the result, send the result in directly with the JSON format. But again, you cannot expect in 3 seconds. You directly result the JSON format that would eliminate your, okay, see here the same result. Same result, I can show it in a nicer card box. And this would be the URL of the document directly. And you can preview the document here with the preview, WOPA frame.aspx, which you can use it. And if the user wants to go directly to the library where the document is, they can go to the library here and to the folder or the library. And the person who created a document and when was the last modified and some snippet in the document, so such a result. All these you can just bring it in. This is using, so this is the one which I mentioned you. You can create your nicer UI in SPFX, but the background task all can be done in Power Automate. So that is the main concept which I want to mention you here. I have so many of the several other samples for SPFX, not just this thing. You can see all the animation. Most of the animation I try to do with anime.js. Okay. One last thing, I will just finish it. sorry, Jenkins. I'll just take one minute just to show. Okay, so yeah, so these are the samples which I have already created and uploaded the whole source code into GitHub. Even this is in my GitHub. You can follow it in my YouTube channel, the same which is also in the YouTube channel which I'm speaking in. So all those animation which you want to do, you can also do the animal taxonomy animation. So you can see here all those. This is a list. So list data, you can see the list data coming in as like a card. And same like animal carousel. You can use the all carousel to show the animation, the same animal which is shown as a carousel. And this is again Bootstrap JS plus whatever the font awesome or whatever you want to use it. And finally, let me show one more Teams API. This is one of my favorite, which I'm currently working on. Sometime it doesn't work. See, now if I want to show it doesn't work. They keep changing the Graph API. So this is completely using the Graph API. You can create 100 teams in just one shot. Okay, from here I tried with creating 200 teams just from the SharePoint SPFX. It worked perfectly fine. Okay, and hover animation. So you can show animation of those same animals in whatever format you want. You have a property window as well. And last thing, property window. So you can change the animation from square to circle. So all these animation effects. All these are in my YouTube channel as well. You can try it out. I have given the source code. You can play around. Okay. So that's all from my side. Hope I have not taken. I have taken 2 minutes extra. Sorry. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you, Chendil. Thanks for the nice session as well as the demo. Really good. People learn a new topic. A lot of stuff also you shared about your work. Thanks for it. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Please join the next session. Yeah, next session is doing by Kirti. Please join the next session. The URL is available in the chat window as well as available there. Okay, thanks for joining and please join with the other session. Yeah.